Chapter 5 Siege of Suffolk. Following the Battle of Deserted House, the regiment, aside from various skirmishes along the picket line, was not again under fire until the Siege of Suffolk, which continued from April 11th to May 3rd, 1863, a period of 23 days. The two intervening months, February and March, were, however, far from being a period of inactivity, as our alert General Peck was pushing work on the fortifications with the utmost vigor, and large drafts were continually made upon the regiment for fatigue and extra picket duty. No sooner was one fort completed than another was begun. Our formidable line of fortifications around Suffolk, extending about 15 miles, was somewhat in the shape of a horseshoe, with the open end toward Norfolk and the Great Dismal Swamp. The Nansemond River crooked around so as to form our north and west line of fortifications, while the swamp protected in part the approaches from the south. From official Confederate reports, we ascertained that at this time the recapture of Norfolk and Portsmouth was regarded of such vital importance that a determined effort must be made to secure those cities as ports for their ironclads and contraband trade, as well as to give them control of the James River. To this end, late in February, their pet commander, Lieutenant General Longstreet, was detached from Lee's army and put in charge of this important movement with headquarters at Petersburg. Suffolk being the key to the situation, its recovery to the Confederacy was first in order. As a strategical movement for the purpose of drawing off troops, Longstreet, a few days previous to his advance upon Suffolk, ordered an attack upon Washington, North Carolina. The stratagem nearly succeeded, as on April 9th, General Terry's brigade, the 130th included, received orders to pack and be ready to move at a moment's notice. Next day we were hustled to the cars double quick, but were scarcely aboard the train when another order sent us back to camp at the same gate. Information had reached General Peck that Longstreet had crossed the Blackwater with an army of 40,000 men and 150 pieces of artillery and was pushing rapidly for Suffolk. To those of us who participated in those stirring scenes in which the movements of the enemy were shrouded in mystery, the rebel official reports and correspondence become interesting reading. It is like a peep behind the curtains. From Longstreet's correspondence with General Lee and others, we learn that he confidently expected that a sudden dash upon the place would assure its capture. In General Lee's letter of reply, he says, "A sudden and vigorous attack on Suffolk will doubtless give you that place." Longstreet moved his forces upon us in 3 heavy columns, expecting but feeble resistance. His plan was to make demonstrations against the more western portions of our lines, while his real attack was to be made by crossing the Nansemond River some 6 miles below Suffolk on our right flank. Another strong force was to be thrown against the Norfolk Railroad on our left flank and rear, and thus surrounded, General Peck's entire army and the city of Norfolk were to fall an easy prize into his hands. That the citizens expected this was evident from their every act and expression. They were unusually jubilant, and in several instances chicken pie dinners were prepared for the expected Confederate victors. However, finding Peck prepared at every point, forts and rifle pits all around with gunboats in the Nansemond River, the rebel commander abandoned the attempt to take the place by surprise and settled down to a regular siege. Batteries were planted along the river in an endeavor to drive away or sink the gunboats, and artillery duels were of frequent occurrence. In fact, for nearly 3 weeks, the roar of cannon and rattle of small arms was almost incessant. All who had heretofore complained because of the severe fatigue duty demanded by General Peck in constructing fortifications now commended his wisdom and vigilance, realizing that their hard labor was not in vain and the old general's head was level. The wily Confederate maneuvered to overwhelm us here and flank us there, and in every way endeavored to penetrate our lines, but was baffled in his every attempt by the watchfulness and activity of our forces. Although sharp engagements with the enemy occurred daily on some portions of our lines, this record must be mainly confined to the part enacted by the 130th New York. On the afternoon of April 11th, our pickets were rapidly driven in or captured, and from Terry's front on the west, where our camp was located, we beheld the long lines of rebel infantry as they came up and filed off to the right and the left of the South Key Road. At the same time, 2 other columns were marching on other roads to strike us from both the north and the south, and matters began to assume a serious aspect. The whir of the long roll was heard in every camp, and in all directions troops were seen scurrying to the forts and rifle pits. Our brigade, under General Terry, immediately took position in the trenches, where we remained during the siege. All through the first night our ears caught the sound of picks and shovels, and what was our surprise in the morning to see before us, just across the river, a long line of rifle pits full of rebel sharpshooters. Between these and our skilled marksmen, a constant fusillade was kept up on the Donnybrook principle. Wherever you see a head, hit it. The popping up of heads and dodging down when we saw a puff of smoke reminded one of woodchuck hunting. To the 130th, April 17th was an eventful day. For the first time, the rebels in the rifle pits remained quiet, and to all appearances their trenches were deserted. General Terry, desiring to learn the condition of things, sent out a reconnoitering force consisting of 6 companies of the 130th, 2 of the 99th New York, and 1 of the New York State sharpshooters, all under command of Lieutenant Colonel Thorpe and Major Scott. The drum corps was also along, with 1 drum and several stretchers, and we had plenty to do. As the line advanced, an occasional shot came from the Johnnies, but when nearer, they suddenly rose up by the hundred and poured a galling fire upon us, which was returned. A large force of reserves was seen advancing at a double quick, upon whom the forts opened a terrific fire, the shells passing over our heads and bursting in the ranks of the enemy. As we were bringing off a wounded man, a rebel bullet struck and cut off a stretcher handle. Having accomplished our object, we retired within our lines, suffering a loss in our regiment of 1 killed and 5 wounded. A comrade informs me that the man killed was Lyman Meade of Company C, who was wounded as we fell back and could not be brought off. The infuriated Rebs were seen to rush over their work and repeatedly shoot him. Another barbarity was enacted upon this occasion. A man of the 99th New York left on the field was stripped of his clothing and his body braced up in plain sight of our lines. That there were among our enemies men of noble natures, very different from those just described, was demonstrated on the same ground 2 weeks later, when the 99th New York crossed and had an experience similar to that of the 17th inst, only with greater loss. That night, as some of our men visited the battlefield in search of dead and wounded, they were confronted by a large, powerful Southerner who rose up from behind a bush, but who proved to be a noble fellow and kindly assisted our boys in finding 3 of the wounded. In parting, he gave each a hearty handshake, exclaiming, "Obertzweig, God bless you. I trust we may sometime meet under different circumstances." During the siege, numerous interesting incidents occurred along our front. Usually every morning, with the first streak of daylight, the rebel sharpshooters commenced blazing away at us, and the duel continued until dark. Sometimes, however, the monotony was broken by an armistice between the 2 hostile lines, when the men on both sides would swarm out of the entrenchments and enjoy a season of friendly intercourse, telling stories, cracking jokes, or singing for each other's entertainment. Occasionally, they would cross over and exchange hardtack, coffee, salt, and other things for tobacco. It was also quite a fashion to exchange coat buttons. After visiting them and seeing their condition of destitution, we were greatly impressed with their devotion, as most of them were ragged and barefooted. Their rations were 1 pound of pork and 3/4 of a pound of poor flour per day, no sugar, coffee, or any such things. They regarded our hardtack and coffee as delicacies fit for a king. When the truce had expired, some of them would sing out, "Hunt your holes, Yanks!" "All right, goodbye, Johnnies," would be the reply. "Goodbye, Yanks, keep your heads down." A minute later, the whang, bang of muskets and whizzing of bullets was proceeding as before. On one occasion, during a truce of this kind, some treacherous Rebs in one of the pits opened fire upon our confiding boys in a regiment near us, killing 1 or more. In an instant, the guns of the nearest fort were trained upon them, and their pit was quickly demolished. As the shells exploded, we could see their bodies hurled in the air, and a yell of satisfaction went up. Even the Johnnies called to us, "Yohan sarved 'em just right." Almost every pleasant evening, the Federal and Confederate bands would gather on opposite sides of the river and discourse sweet music for the entertainment of their thousands of listeners. Once after the bands had alternated with their favorite airs, Hail Columbia, Dixie, Rally Round the Flag, and Maryland, My Maryland, enclosing the 2 united in Home Sweet Home. One evening, our drum corps was requested to go over to Fort Rosecrans, as Longstreet's crack martial band had come down to serenade our boys. After playing alternately a number of tunes with them, their leader shouted, "Purty well done for Yanks," and wished to know if we would exchange music with them. We agreed to do so the following evening, but that night Longstreet abandoned the siege, and his army was retreating toward the Blackwater. Considerable bandying was indulged in. As the rebel lead would splinter the logs about us, someone would call out, "Why don't you fellers learn to shoot? You can't hit the side of a barn." "Well, Johns can't hit a mountain." "When are you ragtags coming over to Suffolk to get that chicken pie supper?" "Long afore you blue-bellied mudsuckers take Richmond." And so it would go on ad infinitum. Some strange things occur in war. On the morning of May 3rd, an agreement was made with the enemy that no shooting should be done that day on our front. Yet at that very moment, while we were sitting out upon our breastwork chatting with our grayback neighbors, a heavy fight was in progress and in plain sight on our north front between Getty's division of the 9th Corps and Hood's forces. I have seen accounts of this circumstance as occurring elsewhere in the Army, but have in my possession an old Army letter dated Suffolk, April 26, 1863, from which this account is taken. Late in the evening of May 3rd, Longstreet, after throwing out a strong picket line, began his retreat, getting several hours' start. Nevertheless, he was closely pursued and severely punished, losing a large number by capture. His total loss during the siege in prisoners, deserters, and killed reached nearly 2,000. He also lost one of his best batteries, captured in a gallant assault by the 89th New York and 8th Connecticut, assisted by the gunboats. An unfortunate and dastardly affair occurred the first night of the siege in the killing of Lieutenant Colonel Kimball of Hawkins's Zouaves by that upstart General Corcoran. The night was exceedingly dark, and Kimball's men were on guard. Corcoran refused to be halted or give the countersign or even tell who he was. Kimball refused to pass him without the countersign. Instead of doing as he should have done or what any other general would have done, he drew his revolver and deliberately killed a most excellent officer. The affair was generally regarded as nothing less than downright murder. No officer at Suffolk was so heartily despised as Corcoran. Later on in the cavalry service, we found his counterpart in the haughty and tyrannical Torbet. An amusing incident occurring just after the siege will be recalled. For nearly a month we had been kept too busy to bathe and were in need of bodily cleansing. I copy from an old letter. We were ordered to fall in with towels and soap and march down to the big pond. There were over 500 officers and men, of whom Colonel Thorpe was the biggest boy of the lot, but he deemed it necessary that a certain degree of military discipline should be observed. Here are his commands. Battalion, attention, undress feet, undress head, unbutton coats, lay off coats, unbutton breeches, jerk breeches, strip off shirts, right face, front, column forward, guide center, double quick, dive. In the water, we had dress parade and other military performances, besides others not very military. After a jolly time, we returned to camp a cleaner and happier set. In this connection, a brief reference to the 130th Drum Corps will be in place. Not only did Colonel Gibbs and the regiment generally regard it as most efficient, but General Terry, himself an excellent drummer, assured me it was one of the best martial bands he ever saw. After our sharp engagement of April 17th, the general rode over to our quarters and expressed his satisfaction as to the part we performed in bringing off the dead and wounded. An interesting circumstance occurred in connection with General Terry that excited some attention. Accompanied by his staff, he halted at our camp to witness a guard mounting. The bass drummer not playing to suit him, he dismounted and took the drum to show how the time should be played. Just then the command was given, "Troop, beat off!" As I looked hesitatingly at him to know what to do, he said, "Go ahead." He was in for it and went down and up the line using both sticks, and in splendid time, making the old drum rattle with a vigor we had not heard before. The spectators set up a cheer, and before we wheeled into place at the right, a good-sized crowd had gathered to witness the novel spectacle of a brigadier general playing a bass drum at guard mounting. My personal recollections of General Terry are pleasant indeed. He was one of the most social and approachable officers of high rank I ever knew, and from him I received many valuable suggestions relative to training the drum corps. Before passing from the siege of Suffolk, it is proper to note that Longstreet, in his autobiography, seeks to belittle the affair, claiming he only went into that portion of Virginia to gather provisions, not to capture Suffolk. All the evidence is to the contrary. He came strong in the conviction of an easy victory and went away chagrined and disappointed. The official reports, both Union and Confederate, show that his special work was the capture of Suffolk, and the Richmond Examiner of November 27, 1863, bewails Longstreet's failure at Suffolk. Nearly all the prisoners and deserters stated that they expected to capture the place. Then the vast and formidable lines of the enemy's works on the three sides, all constructed during 3 weeks, show he had a large army and was not simply on a foraging expedition. It is now known that his forces were over 34,000 strong, exclusive of Hill's reinforcements, rushed up there from North Carolina, making a vast army of over 50,000 men. No doubt as a secondary consideration, they sought to gather in all the provisions possible for use of the Confederate government. During the 47 days we remained at Suffolk after close of the siege, nothing of special importance occurred except a 6 days' reconnaissance on the Blackwater, where we participated in several lively skirmishes, suffering a loss of 2 killed and 3 wounded. In this expedition marched from Suffolk June 12th, via Holland's Corners, reaching South Key next morning. The 130th was put in advance, deployed, and drove the enemy across the river. Near the bank were 2 large residences owned by rebel officers, where we captured a large rebel mail. Many letters from Suffolk were found, which had been carried through our picket lines by innocent-appearing old farmers, After confiscating everything we desired, the houses, together with several thousand pounds of pork, were burned. Next, we marched via Carsville for Franklin, where we had more skirmishing and captured some rebel works, the occupants skipping out as we approached. Comrade A.F. Robinson relates that as we entered the captured pits, one of our regiment found a violin, and while the fight was in progress, commenced playing and dancing. After much marching and counter-marching via Carsville and Blackwater Bridge, we were again at Franklin, where in a sharp engagement June 17th, the sharpshooters from treetops and behind breastworks did the killing referred to. The weather was intensely hot, especially so on our home march of 20 miles, yet during the whole distance not a man of the 130th fell out, while half of some regiments were by the roadside and were brought in by a rear guard later. General Corcoran, commanding, admitted the superiority of the 130th over his much bragged-up legion, usually pronounced legion. Arriving at Suffolk, we found orders awaiting us to strike tents, pack up, and be in readiness to move. The next day, June 19th, we bade farewell to our camps, and to the tune of "The Girl I Left Behind Me," we marched to the cars. Reaching Norfolk, we took boat for Yorktown, at which place we arrived at 5 o'clock the next morning.